This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod.
We are back. This is Art of Darkness. This is a Dark Room episode. This is a Dark Room episode about Roberto Bolaño. And as you know, I am Brad Kelly. This is my co-host, Kevin Kautzman, the great Kevin
Hi.
Kautzman.
Hello, we're back.
How are you, Kevin? How are you?
I'm very well and still reading poetry in the shower.
In the shower. Poems.
Oh, yes. Poems in the shower. Yeah. And I have been working on rolling my R's. Roberto Bolaño.
Good. I have not. I can't do it.
And it's, again, Brad, it's a tilde over the end. We're going to be in tonight.
I did master that. I've been studying Spanish since our episode, and I'm up to, yes, I've got the tilde. So
tonight we are going to be waltzing the tilde.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I missed that pun last time, so I had to get it in.
Nice,
all right.
Nice. Okay. And as you guys know, when we do a Dark Room episode, we have a special guest who knows more about the subject than us, or at least knows it differently than us, or just as excited to talk to about it. It's somebody we were excited to talk to. So today we have the great Astral, writer and podcaster extraordinaire. He's got pieces. I've been listening to the podcast, his great podcast with the greatest podcast name, which is Astral Flight Simulator. Bar none, best podcast name.
You have no idea how self-conscious I am of that name. I actually just decided today to change the name, and now maybe I shouldn't.
Hey man, do what you feel, but I love it.
Oh, I love the compliment.
It's such a great name, man.
That's what I needed. That's what I needed.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also I hadn't dug into the writing on the Substack until just today. Actually, I hadn't realized how much writing is actually on there. You've got pieces on topics ranging from Cormac McCarthy to accelerationism to currents in science fiction. So I'm looking forward to digging more into that. And we'll have links to all of this on the show notes. And podcast has had some pretty prominent guests, Curtis Yarvin, Amanda Milius, Oren McIntyre, who's one of my favorite Twitter follows, Zero HP Lovecraft, and a whole bunch of others. So we're super stoked to have you on, Astral. This is going to be awesome.
Super stoked to be here, man. I appreciate all the compliments. I feel it's through no virtue of my own intellect or provenance that I got these guests on. I've just been, lurking around Twitter for years.
Yeah.
And decided I feel like I saw a hole, and I decided to fill it. I saw a hole in the right-wing podcast scene. And, I'm not like, I guess I am explicitly right wing, but I don't try to make that anything about my subject matter really in any sort of hardcore sense. But the vast majority of my guests are going to be your right wing Anons or your right wing icons, if I can get them, like Yarvin and Amanda Milius. But primarily I'm a show about art and literature. Those are my primary interests. I've worried that my obsession with Roberto Bolaño would be would make me single me out as I thought I'd be the only one. I was going to say ostracized.
They're taking your neo-reactionary card away. You can't go to the meetings anymore because of Bolaño.
The only reason I'm not I didn't say ostracized those because hardly anyone knows who he is. But the few people that I've found that do fucking hate him.
Is that right?
I did. There was a guy on Twitter called Carlos Wider, but he doesn't really use his account. I talked to him a little bit, and he was cool. But I've had other people say, oh, he's a degenerate and he's a leftist and blah, blah, blah. But maybe, I don't know what you guys want to talk about specifically. I'm really interested in the literature itself. But if we want to talk about his biography, his leftism is maybe not exactly what people think of it.
Yeah, well, maybe we can. I mean, I do want to get there. Maybe we can start like, what is your sort of origin story with Bolaño? Where did you start? Why did you start? That kind of thing.
It's a good question. It's a good question. I stumbled into Bolaño. I had never heard of him. I have always paid attention to literature and always paid attention to what's being published and tried to read new things. But somehow I don't know where I was at when all the fervor was going on in 2007 and 8 and 9, when he really took off. The Savage Detectives and 2666 were published, and somehow all that passed me by. I don't know, because I thought I was paying attention. But anyway, I met up with this group of guys online that I kind of stumbled across on Instagram, of all places, just posting different books that we like to read and beers that we drink and video games we play and just random bullshitting. So we started a book club. And all of them except me were primarily Spanish speaking, and they were all from Latin America, Cuba, Ecuador, Nicaragua. I can't even remember where. There's probably 12 of them, and all of them were from South America. And none of them had ever read Bolaño. And right when I joined, they were like, "What the fuck is wrong with us? We're Latin Americans." They all lived in America though. And we've never read Bolaño, so we gotta read Bolaño. So, and I was like, I don't even know who this is. Whatever you guys want to read. And they picked Distant Star, and it just blew me the fuck away. I mean, it just changed my life. At least it changed my life and my perspective, I should say, completely. It was like the potential of what literature could be was so limited prior to reading Distant Star, and then afterwards I'm like, there is no limit. And then I read The Savage Detectives, and it was like twice that. I read a bunch of other books of his, and I love them all, but those are the two that to me were like milestones in my life, for my literary life, really. I have read other books that palpably changed my life, my day-to-day experience, by making me make certain decisions or changing things about my life. Bolaño wasn't exactly like that, but he's near and dear to me as much as those writers are, because I felt like my love and obsession with literature, and I imagine that you guys and many other readers of Bolaño can agree with this. I felt like my love and lifelong obsession with literature that bordered on like craziness, like obsession, was finally vindicated, because there was somebody else who like had taken it farther than I ever could.
Yeah.
And I know he died of like liver failure, but I always say that Bolaño died for poetry. He was like a martyr for poetry. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Well, let me jump in here. I have to tease the Patreon episode, the After Dark episode. We're going to talk about not the liver failure per se, although it's going to come up. We're going to talk about this idea that came out around his death, that he was a junkie. So we're on the After Dark episode. We're going to dig a little further into this idea. Was Roberto Bolaño a junkie? And that's for Patreon subscribers. Of course, you find that at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. You get extra episodes. Every recording we do another 20 or 30 minutes. So if you like the show, support what we're doing. And on one of the episodes, I'm not going to say which, on one of the deep cuts, you can hear Brad rap.
Oh no!
Yeah, exactly.
Is this all an elaborate trick to get me to as an audience?
Yeah, this is all. The whole podcast is about. Hopefully, you'll buy my mixtape that hasn't come out yet, but I'm getting there.
Yeah, we're gonna do the funky hip hop musical about Roberto Bolaño. It's gonna be great.
That might actually exist.
It might.
Yeah,
it might.
probably already does.
I could see that down some Barrio for sure.
Distant Star is so good.
I have not read Distant Star, so give me the rundown of like what is Distant Star.
Okay, so I mean, I don't know how elaborate you want me to get, so I'll be brief, and then you can prompt me if you want to go deeper. But to make a long story short, it's about this guy who was part of an artist collective when they were all young and idealistic. Sounds familiar already, I'm sure. You read I remember I listened to your Bolaño episode. You've read
I've read Savage Detectives and 2666.
Right. Yes,
basically.
okay. So So he revisits the same themes all the time. So there's this young group of friends, and one of them goes on to become a fascist, and it's in it's Allende's Chile, but it becomes Pinochet's Chile. And he continues his art as a fascist, and the violence he commits, it becomes part of his art. He does other things as well, not just violence, but one of the characters who I think was also part of the collective, but I think he was more loosely affiliated with the collective. He wasn't deep into it, if I remember correctly. Kevin, you might have to correct me on that. It's been about 5
It's been a
years.
while since I've read it, but
Yeah.
I have the Wikipedia in front of me. So why don't I'll start there. So it tells the story of Alberto Ruiz Tagla, an aviator who exploits the 73 Chilean coup d'etat to launch his own version of the new Chilean poetry, a multimedia enterprise involving skywriting, torture, photography, murder, and verse. And then it's the narrator sort of confronting Ruiz Tagla in a college poetry workshop. Does that, yeah.
No, of course. I think he was an affiliate of his in some capacity before Taglia became Carlos Wider or Vidir. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's German.
Vita. Yeah, depends on where the E is. I'd have to look.
Yeah.
Right. I forgot you speak German, don't you?
Yeah.
So it's Vita. Yeah. I never knew that.
Vita.
So so he goes on, he embarks upon this mission to find him and hunt him down, but he disappeared after Pinochet. Actually, he didn't disappear after Pinochet lost power, because he went too far even for the fascists, and they actually forced him out. They actually forced him out because his art was too explicit, and it was too explicit about the torture, because, as you probably know, in Chile, they disappeared thousands of people. Right. And these victims that they disappeared would turn up in Vita's art. So they had to kick him out, and he disappeared. So this detective, this literary detective, has to hunt him down. But the only way he can hunt him down is by traces and hints in the art world and in the literary world of his signature style that he tries to piece together to trace him down. And he does do that, and it's through crazy shit like some what is that, snuff porn. He finds a snuff porn out of Italy, and he's like, this has the trademark of this guy. I think he filmed this and directed this, and he went and this is only one anecdote. Right. The whole book is this. He goes and finds a actress from the porn movie when she's much older, and it turns out it was him. So it's just like Savage Detectives, where this lady's like telling an anecdotal story about him, and then he moves on, and he eventually does track him down, and they have this little confrontation at the end. But of course, in true Bolaño fashion, the confrontation isn't some big, Quentin Tarantino shootout. It's some profound, sort of cryptic, sort of leaves you hanging ending, which, Savage Detectives' ending is pretty final and climactic, but 2666 certainly is enigmatic and leaves you hanging.
Yeah.
So you can already see in this brief summary all the trademarks of all of his works here, with the vanished literary figure and the tracing them down through their work, of which there's only little traces of it here and there that they can pick up on. But there's,
and then also the work itself as a either like a territory of or emblematic of violence, right? I mean, this is a sort of a thing. It seems to me that Bolaño he's implying the overlap of the act of writing or poetry and acts of violence. And I mean, other writers have sort of tread the same ground before too, but I'm really interested in that. Like, what about writing is there something fundamental about the act of writing itself that is terroristic, even if the political aims of the work itself aren't necessarily terroristic? You see this in like, I don't know if either of you guys have read Don DeLillo's Mao 2.
No, I only have White Noise by him.
Yeah. That might be the one DeLillo that I haven't read. I went through a DeLillo phase when we were at Texas, Brad. I devoured DeLillo.
It's all pretty
Yeah.
good. Mao too is, maybe a lesser work, but it'd be a major work by anybody else. But there is a whole, this is sort of one of the undercurrents of it is the act of writing it's almost terrorism against reality in a way, right? And there's and Bolaño's kind of doing that as like, well, if you show them actually committing if you marry it even closer to acts of violence, you're making that point even stronger. So that's really interesting. Distant Star sounds awesome.
It's only 150 pages.
Oh, I got to read it. I'm gonna.
You can read it in a day.
After this.
2 days.
Yeah,
you can. I got a question though. Writing being terroristic. What do you think DeLillo meant by that, or at least in that book? What do you mean by that, and how does it relate to that book? Yeah. Because my mind goes two places. I don't think you mean like propaganda and art writing used as propaganda. You don't mean that, right?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you could use it as that. I mean,
but that's kind of like a banal take, and I don't think you're going that way.
No,
yeah, okay.
No. I'm saying more of like a okay, so like an act of terrorism is an attempt to specifically use fear to upend some status quo, right? And I think the big status quo is like the fabric of reality, right? And so writing can, I think, as an act, now I'm getting into kind of mystical things, and maybe I'm doing that, as a writer, I'm doing this, we are the legislators of the universe kind of thing. But I think there is this notion where you can talk about writing as we're going to actually bend realities. We're going to bend the big status quo. Bill Burroughs called it, we're going to punch a hole in the big lie, right? And I think about like China, one of the kinds of narrative fiction, either in books or movies, that they clamp down on is time travel. They don't want people to be thinking about alternate possible realities, right? But that's not a direct attack on the Chinese government to say, oh, time travel's real. They literally don't want their people to think about the possibility that reality could bend around the current situation. So it's like writing in that way. I think there is this element where there's an affinity between terrorism and writing. But
that's an excellent description of Bolaño. That's fucking perfect. I never thought of it in those terms or heard it in those terms.
All that said, he was also concerned with the impotence of it. So, all of this is true. I think he maybe finally in 2666 was very concerned that we weren't just doing anything except of farting for each other.
I've got a great passage from 266 to read about that very same thing. It might be
let's hear it.
Okay,
I think you might have said something along these lines in your episode, which was a great episode. He's ultimately a tragic writer, and nobody can come away from reading him without seeing that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I want to talk a little bit about the sort of optimism versus pessimism and all that too. But this comes from near the end of. I mean, it's a big book, so there's like another 100 pages, but I would call it near the end.
Yeah.
And this is where. Do you say it Archambaldi or Archambaldi?
I think it's Archambaldi.
I think it's Archambaldi as well. This is where writer, for people who've read it, this is where writer reveals himself as Archambaldi to this guy that he's going to borrow a typewriter from. I don't know if that rings a bell for anybody. But anyway, this is the guy he's going to borrow a typewriter from speaking. This isn't Archambaldi. So it goes like this. My poor father. I was a writer, but my indolent, voracious brain gnawed at my own entrails. Vulture of my Prometheus self, or Prometheus of my vulture self, one day I understood that I might go so far as to publish excellent articles in magazines and newspapers, and even books that weren't unworthy of the paper in which they were printed. But I also understood that I would never manage to create anything like a masterpiece. You may say that literature doesn't consist solely of masterpieces, but rather is populated by so-called minor works. I believed that too. Literature is a vast forest, and the masterpieces are the lakes, the towering trees or strange trees, the lovely, eloquent flowers, the hidden caves. But a forest is also made up of ordinary trees, patches of grass, puddles, clinging vines, mushrooms, and little wildflowers. But I was wrong. There's actually no such thing as a minor work. I mean, the author of the minor work isn't Mr. X or Mr. Y. Mr. X and Mr. Y do exist. There's no question about that. And they struggle and toil and publish in newspapers and magazines. And sometimes they even come out with a book that isn't unworthy of the paper it's printed on. But those books or articles, if you pay close attention, are not written by them. Every minor work has a secret author, and every secret author is by definition a writer of masterpieces. Who writes the minor work? A minor writer, or so it appears. The poor man's wife can testify to that. She's seen him sitting at the table, bent over the blank pages, restless in his chair, his pen racing over the paper. The evidence would seem to be uncontrovertible, but what she has seen is only the outside, the shell of literature, a semblance. Okay, so he keeps going on. He goes on in this vein a little bit, but then we get this last bit. By now I knew it was pointless to write, or that it was worth it only if one was prepared to write a masterpiece. Most writers are deluded or playing. Perhaps delusion and play are the same thing, two sides of the same coin. The truth is we never stop being children, terrible children covered in sores and knotty veins and tumors and age spots, but ultimately children. In other words, we never stop clinging to life because we are life. One might also say we're theater, we're music. By the same token, few are the writers who give up. We play at believing ourselves immortal. We delude ourselves in the appraisal of our own works and in our perpetual misappraisal of the works of others. See you at the Nobel, writers say. As one might say, see you in hell. I just love it. It's like this ultimate, what I like about it is like, to me, it's like writing is a futile enterprise in a way, but also sort of necessary, right? It's the vulture eating the entrails of Prometheus. It's like you don't get out of it in some way. So
it's also highly neurotic, that passage, but in a cathartic way, though.
Yeah.
In a cathartic way.
Yeah.
And what were you trying to evoke by reading that?
I wanted to get at, well, what kind of came up was like, for me, is Bolaño's relationship to writing. And I wasn't sure if he was speaking in the voice of that typewriter owner that's giving this up or not.
I think he was.
I think it was him. Yeah. And that's kind of what the conclusion I've come to now just by reading it and kind of talking the lead up in the conversation with you guys. And there is, he's in, and as a writer, I recognize some of that. Like there is no minor work, because if it's a minor work, it's not up to your potential, and so it doesn't count in some way. Like he's playing at a metaphysical level of what the writing craft is, and it's not necessarily this like, oh, like religious visions from heaven. It's a Promethean effort, with your entrails being eaten by vultures.
I mean, and of course, this is the same novel that famously has the passage that is solely comprised of these descriptions of these horrific murders.
Right.
And so he's getting at the consequence of small things, seemingly small things.
Right. And that's the other half of it, is how are you going to ever write a masterpiece if you can't write about that stuff, right? Because part of the writing the masterpiece is at some point you're going to have to look at the worst. You're going to have to look at, murder, senseless murder, right?
Yeah, I'd like to get to that. I'd like to focus on that for a little while, but it's very off topic from this passage that you read, at least in my mind.
Sure.
I see this kind of goes back to what I said about how I was vindicated for being an obsessive about this stuff, because like I had a phase in my life. I mean, I've always more or less been a writer, but I had this phase in my life where I was like a basket case shut in, and I wrote a novel, and it was like this. It was like I was like, I don't know. It was like the equivalent of like sitting in my apartment, like and cutting obsessively and listening to like really dark music, And I realized it was like an exorcism, and it was an exorcism partially because of the subject matter. If anybody's interested, also I'm serializing it on my blog. The first installation is called the Aleph.
Oh, I saw that.
But I'm not here to shill that though.
Shill it though. Where can people find the blog?
All right. The Astral Flight Substack, astralflight.substack.com. It's in my link is in my bio.
Yeah, we'll have it in show notes too for sure.
Yeah. So the stuff that was inside me that had to come out was a form of exorcism, right? But and this is more to Bolaño's point than that, which is that the process was also like torture. It was like I fucking shut myself in my apartment, which was one room, literally one tiny room, turned all the lights off and battled a fucking demon. And the demon was the writing, not the emotions. Because yes. I would start writing, right? And I would bang out 30 pages over a couple of days. And I'd say, fuck, this isn't my voice, you know? This is the voice of the last book that I wrote. Now I have to delete that and start over. And then that would start an internal battle, you know? And I feel like the passage you read, and that went on, you know, for years. I feel like the passage you read was a poetic expression of that part of the process, because the emotions involved in the content and the struggle involved in getting it out perfectly correct, are two separate beasts, and you have to battle and conquer both of them. And you know, this is why Bolaño is like important to me, because he gives voice to that experience. You know what I mean? I let that. I don't know what it's like for other people, man, but I let that novel sit on my computer for 3 or 4 years because I was like, I bled. I mean, you know that Charles Bukowski poem, "Bleed for This," I think it's called. I fucking bled for that thing, and I don't give a fuck if it's good. Excuse my language.
No, it's fine.
I take it back. I don't care if it's good. It's got nothing to do with whether or not it's good. It served the purpose in my life that I needed it to serve at that time, and I didn't want to look at it. And I see, hopefully other writers can relate to what I'm saying, because it's not a solipsistic anecdote. That's what I think Bolaño does for everyone that reads him. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm repeating a word.
No, I mean, I know what you're talking
Reading him
about.
is cathartic. Yeah.
I just reached the end of writing a novel draft, and I give it a couple weeks, and then I go back to the beginning, right? And the process starts over. And so I'm on vacation for my novel for a minute, but like it's what you say. I've learned to pace myself a little bit, so I can kind of have a functional life, but it takes over everything. It takes over what you're thinking about when you're not doing it. Right. You know, you kind of have a distant-eyed stare when you're supposed to be having a conversation with other people about stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
And you're like, oh, what are you thinking about? And you're like, I can't even start explaining to you because I'm thinking about this little piece on this huge mosaic that I'm working on, you know? And so I can't tell you what I'm thinking right now.
And you want the whole world to stop so you can run back because you realize, like, oh, wait, that one little piece is out of place.
Right.
And you got to go fix it.
and then there's like that, and then there's like the battle for your own attention, because like when you're not doing it, it's all you want to do, but then when you're doing it, you find a million reasons to distract yourself. Like it is battling a demon for sure. Sure. So yeah, that's kind of getting at, I guess, why I did want to read that passage, because I think he articulates that as well as anybody ever has.
Yeah, and it's kind of like
I love being a playwright.
Yeah,
is it the same process?
It's a similar process, but I tried my hand at prose, and it was one of the best decisions I made to sort of abandon it because of everything you fellows are describing. I wasn't cut out for it, and I found my tidy little corner in the play format. And but it's a similar struggle, but different, I would say, and not nearly as protracted. Nobody wants a 400-page play,
right?
So you can get it done in 2 weeks. But I've tortured myself plenty writing plays, and I've alienated plenty of people, and drank too much, and ruined all of relationships. So ruined, all of it. So Astral, I talked over you. You were going to say something.
No, it's fine, man. So right, I know, like, I had two major phases in my life where I really got into writing really deep, and the first one was like, I could tell long stories about this, but basically I was sitting on my stoop in the city smoking a cigarette, and I was so hammered drunk that I cut my thumb open on like the rim of the beer can. Ooh. Really bad, and I was bleeding all over the place, and I was like too drunk to take care of it. And I realized, like, I'm not cut out to be a starving artist. Like, I'm just sitting in my apartment, drinking myself into oblivion and writing these stories. And man, I think they're fucking good stories. Like, they're really good. But I was like, the trade-off isn't worth it. I need to just go get a regular job and like give the dream up. Because, you know, like, I was like hanging out with guys who were like blasted out of their mind on like speed, like chain smoking cigarettes at 3:00 in the morning on the corner, who were like 45, telling me about like the next, you know, novel they had coming out. But of course they never had a fucking
Never
novel
had
coming
it.
out. And I was like, this is what's, you know what I mean? That's what's at the end.
It's not romantic.
And even some of these guys, man, like there's one guy in particular, but there was others. But there's one guy in particular, like he like was a writer for Saturday Night Live at one point, and he had like written a few episodes of a couple television shows and stuff. And I was just like, that's what this is all for. You know what I mean? So like I abandoned it, but then I went back to it, and now this podcast, I didn't come on here to give you guys my biography.
No, you're all right, man. I'm digging
get back to Bolaño.
This is a very Bolaño-esque.
This is great. Exactly.
Right. Right. Thank you for saying that, because only of all the people I read, he's the only one that I have this relationship with. You know what I mean? Like, he's the only one who vindicated those years that I thought I wasted. You know what I mean? Like, well, and Bukowski's the other one too.
But yeah, you got to imagine him. You got to imagine before he took his turn to writing novels.
He was doing that, right?
Yeah, he was drinking. I don't know what he was doing exactly, but he was like working in a campground. Like he wasn't blowing the doors off the world.
He started writing novels because he needed to make money.
Yeah.
That's such a wild. That's crazy.
Right. That's so insane.
Yeah.
Right. No, yeah. Nobody's done that for the last 100 years except for him.
He changed. I mean, dude, part of my whole raison d'etre for like being online and doing all this is to try and revive something that I thought was dead. I said this on some other episode. I'm not sure which, but it might be Lomez, the episode with Lomez, who's a very important person that everyone needs to pay attention to and support. I said that I forgot what I was saying. I said that
you were trying to bring something back to life.
Oh, right. I was trying to revive something. I'm trying to revive something with this podcast that I thought was dead. And it was when I found Bolaño and then Zero HP Lovecraft that I realized it wasn't dead. It just had gone underground in America, switched to Latin America, and they had kept the fire burning. And I hope Zero lit something. Has he been on the show? I mean, you guys read him?
We're familiar with him.
Yep. He hasn't been on Art of Darkness, although perhaps one day.
Yes. Yeah, he you should make that happen, because
we should have him on to talk about Lovecraft.
Yeah, we have an episode on H.P. Lovecraft, so that would be the natural fit.
Maybe it's a little too on the nose, though. Yeah, go ahead, Astral.
No, he picked up the baton, and he seems to be carrying it by himself right now, for far as I can tell. And I see Bolaño as the bridge. You know?
Well, how do you describe what is the baton? What do you mean?
The baton is real literature, and literature as an art, and specifically what I mean is evolving the form. I hate to use such a technical term like that. You could say breathing new life into the medium. You could say bringing heart to a dead, kind of sterile medium. But truly what I think they're doing is evolving the form, because if you can't reduce their work. They're not like each other at all.
Right.
But you can't reduce Bolaño's work to his influences, even though his influences are all over his work. And he's explicit about it. And you can point, this is like him, this is like this guy, and this is like that guy. And the same is true for Zero. But the sum of its parts, the whole is not equal to the sum of its parts. The whole is a totally separate new thing that I contend has never really been seen before. And I remember when Jennifer Egan's book, The Visit from the Goon Squad, came out. I don't know if you guys saw that. It won the Pulitzer.
Yeah, it did.
And it's a good book. It's a good book. I liked it.
Yeah.
But
we met Jennifer Egan, right? I don't know if you were there, Kevin. I met Jennifer Egan right around the Pulitzer coming out.
She came through Texas, yeah.
Where'd you meet her? In Texas?
Yeah, Kevin and I went to the Michener Center down at UT Austin. So we met a bunch of these people. She's cool. She's great. Yeah.
She dated Steve Jobs.
Talented. That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. That rings a bell. I had forgotten that. Yeah. Yeah, she's super cool. She's super smart.
And I don't want to take anything away from her. I really don't. I think she's great. And I've read other books by her too. The one about Manhattan Beach. It's good.
Yeah, I haven't read that one, but yeah, I know.
It's good. But when she won the Pulitzer, the things they said about Visit from the Goon Squad and why they gave her the Pulitzer, Bolaño had already done all that. But Bolaño had already done it, and done it better and done it more. But it was off the radar, at the time. Yeah. Well, no, Bolaño had blown up by that time, but Bolaño blew up with The Savage Detectives and 2666. And then people went back and read his other stuff. But as we've already said, he was already dead by then.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it wasn't like his books were coming out to a lot of fanfare in America and changing the genre and changing the scene in America as he was writing them. And I don't think Jennifer Egan copied him at all. I think it's just, what's the word I'm looking for here? Belated. I think American literature for a long time was belated. And the reason I think had a lot to do with identity politics and woke art, which isn't art. It's a devolution of art.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bunch of reasons why, but I think the identity politics hogtied artistic forms in the novel in America. I think PC culture and people like Jonathan excuse my language, I keep cursing, Jonathan Franzen being held up as like the next guy, and he's just drivel, just no redeeming qualities. And he's kind of a sign, like him and Wallace, David Foster Wallace, they were like in the same way that Bolaño was, like they're very iconoclastic, and they denounce and tear apart the predecessors viciously and relentlessly. And I do think American literature had come to some sort of deadlock because like every single book was like a 20-something white male's struggle to individuate in a postmodern American culture, which, I don't have the same critique that like a feminist would have of that, which is like that it's like toxic masculinity, even though that's fucking what David Foster Wallace said about it. Which is, I feel like he was just pandering when he said that. I can't believe he said that, but he did.
Yeah.
We can't deny it.
It's just the campus novel thing, like
the campus novel, yeah.
Right. Once DeLillo wrote White Noise, so there and William Gass wrote The Tunnel. I don't really want to hear about college professors anymore.
And Stoner's like
Stoner,
which isn't bad. None of these are like bad.
No, those are great. I love all three of those. It's like once those were done, though, it was like it's settled.
It's settled, man.
Right.
It's settled. And I just I don't have the feminist critique like it's toxic masculinity, blah blah blah. But if you're rehashing the same, and I guess I'm reiterating what you're saying, if you're rehashing the same story over and over and over again, it's gonna fizzle and die,
Right.
And I think that's part of the reason why Infinite Jest is such a mess, because he was trying to do the same exact thing but in a new way, but it was like too late. It was like already over by that point, even though I love that book.
Well, and this is what people are struggling with, and this is what Zero, I think, is dealing with, the idea that this is an extraordinarily tired medium. The novel has been exhausted, so we've got to find new ways to grapple with the novel in the light of the internet. Why should I sit and read 100 pages of anything? And so that's something that current writers have to contend with. As a playwright, it's funny for me because it's like, we're the most ancient, antiquated, ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to do. And I know it. And that doesn't mean that I don't want to try to do something funky or new or strange with the form as well. But it's funny because, we're kind of in the weeds here as writers, but it's fine. That's good. That's what this show's for. You're writing something that's going to live outside of the page.
Totally.
So it's just a completely different animal, whereas the novel is kind of this onanistic, enclosed thing. Can I ask you, Astral, just to anchor us back into what you mentioned at the beginning, this book club where it was you and the UN delegate from Latin America. What did they? So you read Distant Star and The Savage Detectives with that group. What did they make? What did they make of those books?
They were probably on the same level of obsessed with it as I was, and they were writers too, most of them. Mm-hmm. Or one of them like wrote screenplays, like, and these aren't people anybody's ever heard of. None of us ever did anything with what we were writing at the time, but yeah, they were obsessed with it, and they definitely took ownership. And this, I know you wanted to save this to the end, so maybe I'll just foreshadow what we're going to talk about. But they felt like they had a privileged. That's a buzzword. I'm not using it in the stupid, way. But they felt like they had a privileged insight into Bolaño, and they felt like they had some sort of ownership over the work. And this sounds ridiculous, but it actually wasn't totally unwarranted. They did read him in Spanish. I was the only, idiot that couldn't speak Spanish in the group. So I always felt like I was the retarded younger brother that they took along, that their mom made them take along and talk to me in English about it.
Right.
But they almost to the extreme that I feel for Bolaño, I think they were even more.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But different than me though. Very different too. They kind of saw it as like, this is going to get way off topic, so we should probably just leave it at this.
Let's rock and roll.
But there is a, man, this is really this could open a can of worms.
I like it.
The Castizo futurism thing in America. Okay, so these guys were very macho. They were ultimately on the left because of certain things that they held dear that they're never going to let go of. Immigration, mainly, but other things too. But they were very masculine, very macho. They fucking hated feminism. I'm sorry that I keep cursing. I'm from New York. There's nothing
all right.
I can do about it.
At this point, let's go. It's all good. Fuck it.
All right. Good. So they felt like their culture was ascendant in America, and to an extent, they were right. And I don't necessarily feel as bad about it as many right-wingers do, because these guys were cool, and they showed me a way to look at this situation without utter contempt. Let's just put it that way. And where I'm going with this and how it relates to Bolaño is they kind of held him up as their avatar and their paladin. Like we're fucking, we're here, and like we're making a dent, and like we're part of the culture, and we're going to use this guy as a way to force our way in the door.
Yeah. Was that because Bolaño had made such an impact?
Yeah, because he was so popular. Yeah. And because he was so Latin American. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's nothing American about this guy.
Right. And respected intellectually. We're not talking about
Absolutely.
like some dance music from South America. It's like actually something
people,
you can barge into the
from the New York Times
totally.
are talking about him in hushed tones.
Right.
The great Roberto Bolaño.
Totally.
Right.
And they would even say things to me too about why he's better for this than like someone like Cortázar or Borges or Gabriel Garcia Marquez. They were explicitly saying like, this is the better representative than those guys are, and they had their reasons. Now, I'm sorry I mince my words so much saying all that. I just know that amongst our crew, it's like unpopular to like, and my feelings are kind of mixed on the whole thing. But that's where those guys were at. You know what I mean? Like that's where those guys were at, and I got it. You know what I mean? I get it. Like they weren't totally wrong. You know, it's like the way a lot of these guys feel about their soccer stars. You know, that one guy died recently, the football star, I forgot his name, in Brazil. And it was like a national fucking tragedy.
Yeah.
And they
Maradona.
Thank you. That's exactly who I meant. This was like their Maradona, because these guys were literary nerds.
I think Maradona was Argentine.
So sorry.
No,
so there are more than a handful of macho dudes out there reading novels. Is this what you're telling me?
I know. Well, but this is the thing, man. This is the thing. That's like America. America is where it's like effeminate.
Yeah. Right,
and the
right.
effeits to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
look at Kerouac, dude. He wasn't just a legitimate tough guy, but he actually had some scorn for like Ginsberg and some of the more effeminate.
That great interview where he's drunk off his ass on who's he with? Yeah, Dick Cavett or something like that. Not Dick Cavett.
William F. Buckley, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
he's just wasted and just sort of like he literally says something like digs at Ginsberg, who's sitting in the audience. It's beautiful.
It is.
Yeah.
That is iconic.
I don't know that I've seen that. I'm going to screen that for myself after.
Yeah,
I'm making a note
it's
right
short,
now.
but it's fantastic. And people used to go on TV hammered.
Yeah.
And they do not do that anymore.
No, I think he was smoking a cigar too.
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right.
That's how
that
was
was
to be
macho.
in America. Norman Mailer.
Macho. Yeah, Norman Mailer was macho. There was an Ernest Hemingway.
Right.
And that wasn't even that it was all macho. I mean, you had guys like, we covered Faulkner on an episode of this. Now he wasn't like a hurly-burly kind of guy, but he rode horses. He was tough kind of in his own way, In
my world, it would
manliness.
be Sam Shepard. Sam Shepard had that vibe, that rock and roll cowboy. Right. I'm here to take your girl.
Right.
Machismo, and that came across in his screen roles too. You could you watch The Right Stuff, and he just oozes this like male, virility. And it's all gone. That's all gone.
That is one of the edges I think you might need to keep. Not the only edge, but one of the edges I think you might need to keep the novel alive to a certain extent.
And you want to know, man, I'm being so tangential. You want to know where I see that coming up? I see that Terror House Press. Do you guys follow them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Matt Forney, man. Like I wasn't sure about that guy for a while. No offense if you listen to this, Matt, because I was like kind of trying to get him on my show, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it because of his past. And then he started having this, like, basically a midlife crisis right on the timeline. Oh, and I didn't know what I thought about it at first. Yeah. But as it kept going, I hope he understands that I mean this with respect and reverence. As it kept going, it was like every time I would see a tweet by him, it was like, I don't know, like I could hear like 1985 riffs coming out of like Guns N' Roses and the Sex Pistols and like this old school, like soundtrack to like the Live Fast Die Young of the 1980s Sunset Strip, like that Hunter S. Thompson sort of helped inaugurate. I was like picturing Hunter S. Thompson with, Motley Crue playing in the background while I'm reading Matt Forney's tweets. And I'm like, this is it, man. This is it. Like, this is what I was talking about before with you guys. Like, it's coming back, I think. I really think it's coming back.
I think so.
And I was like, I got to start a podcast to have these people on and like document this as it's happening.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. We're just seeing the advent. Not the advent, but like we're in a phase right now. You know how like Napster blew apart the record industry in like 2000 or whatever.
Yeah, man.
We're going through that right now in the publishing industry. And so, yes. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So those guys, I keep dropping all these names, but like the point I'm making here is that like you can just watch it slowly fade. You can just watch the fire slowly go out in American literature and American, male writers.
Yeah. Not me, man. My entrails grow back every morning.
Yeah. But where else is it? Where else is it? I mean, where else is this happening in America? I mean, I don't think it's happening anywhere but in our scene.
Yeah.
That energy moves around, doesn't it? And it always it'll come up like one of Cthulhu's tendrils, one of his sort of octopus. What do you call it? Like a little arm. It's coming. You can't. Yeah, tendril. You can't keep it down. You can only suppress it for so long before that energy shifts and then pops back up. And there's room for everything. And of course, so much of this is about the publishing industry and who buys books and who buys fiction and who doesn't. But yeah, I do love seeing some of what's happening in the space with Passage Prize and with what Zero did with his publishing, whether you buy the politics or not. Like, I think a person could be an extraordinary writer coming all the way from the left and an extraordinary writer coming all the way from the right.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, and it's the writer's job to blow up the Overton window. It's like what Brad said earlier. It's I don't care which direction, just blow my mind. Take me away from this mundane, normie world and make me think differently about something, anything, and hold
the terrorism. Yes.
Yeah. Punch a hole in the big lie, man.
Yeah. Right. Well, this is why. I mean, and I even on the Sarah Kane episode that we did, I heard from somebody who said, "Mate, I disagree with you about Sarah Kane." And it was sort of about her politics and this and that, but I'm like, she still blew up the play. She was the writer who blew up the play. And we need that. We need to keep blowing this stuff up. I've got a poem from Roberto Bolaño. Should I just read it? Why not?
Yeah, why not?
One of those episodes. The memory of Lisa descends again through night's hole, a rope, a beam of light, and there it is, the ideal Mexican village, amidst the barbarity, Lisa's smile, Lisa's frozen film, Lisa's fridge with the door open, sprinkling a little light on the disorganized room that I, now pushing 40, call Mexico City, call Roberto Bolaño, looking for a payphone, amidst chaos and beauty, to call his one and only true love. What a nice tidy. It's a love poem. What a nice tidy little.
But,
love it.
I'm gonna go there, and you can refute me. But like, make that poem in your mind about writing, and make that poem in your mind about literature. You know what I mean? I think it works. It works for me anyway.
Yeah,
I think the subject is always the muse.
I think Bolaño's always. I mean, that's always the thing that you can set whatever he's writing against, and it's always his metaphorical reference point. Is that it can always lay on writing. I think even 300 Dead Women in Mexico. I think you can.
Let me read another one, and let's read it with that in mind. This idea that maybe he's writing about writing here. My gift to you will be an abyss, she said, but it will be so subtle you'll perceive it only after many years have passed, and you are far from Mexico and me. You'll find it when you need it most, and that won't be the happy ending, but it will be an instant of emptiness and joy, and maybe then you'll remember me, if only just a little.
Yeah. It's also the wistful, borderline neurotic, but also tragic vibe. The tragic, hinting at tragedy, gesturing to tragedy. I mean, is it explicit, or am I just reading into it that this is unrequited love, or it's a relationship that's over? I don't know.
I think this goes back to, wasn't Lisa the young woman that he shacked up with when he was young? I think so. And her mother intervened, and so I think he might be thinking about this past love, this young love that he had in Mexico City. Yeah.
But I mean, the great poems are always about like 3-4 different things at the same time, right? Right. Yeah. So it is an abyss, and it is writing, and it is the lost love, and it is Mexico, and it's for sure.
Do you guys remember this passage from the Savage Detectives? It's been on my mind for like almost this entire episode. Maybe I'll go read it. You guys reading passages, I'm like, fuck, I didn't prepare a passage to read.
All right, man.
Do you remember the passage where he talks about how a story lives while the writer is alive and people are reading it, and then the writer dies, but the story lives on, and then it goes on in time. You know what? That
rings a bell. Find it. Maybe
I'll find it. You guys talk.
Yeah,
I'll come back.
We can totally. This is great. We're here with the great Astral, and
we're getting. This is
it's going to be one of those episodes, Brad.
I'm
one of those,
and it makes me, it's amping me up to get back to the keyboard tomorrow morning. So
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. So you're a musician.
No, just my typing keyboard.
Oh, to type, yeah, dude.
Yeah.
And I got 3 kids. I too many personal details, but it's so hard to find time for me.
I'm
to write.
sure. I know what you mean.
And I keep telling myself I'm gonna do the Jocko Willink program and get up at 4 a.m. to write.
That's what I do. That's what I do, brother. I've been doing it for years. Yeah. This is how it's working though. Because eventually I don't get enough sleep. So eventually I'm going to like have dementia or something. So I'm just like cutting off cognitive function in the last few years of my life and trying to use it now.
Same, bro. Same. So listen, I'll read this passage when I find it. But let's move on. So, well, I'll let you guys. It's your show. It's so hard not to revert back to the host. It's
You're doing
constantly
great.
a struggle for me.
I'm hearing it. No, it's great. That's good. We're definitely going to have no dead air on this episode. That's great. Well, and so you read. So your initial Bolaño was Distant Star, then The Savage Detectives, and then did you?
No, actually, I read. By Night in Chile and Amulet. And The Insufferable Gaucho, and maybe half of The Return, and then I read 2666.
Oh,
and then I read The Savage Detectives. I can't believe I just remembered all that in order.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
and I don't know what's wrong with me, but one of the guys from that group bought me Last Evenings on Earth and Nazi Literature in the Americas for my birthday one year. And I never read them, and I need to go. I'm kicking myself over that. I need to get those two.
I'm fascinated with I haven't read Nazi Literature in Americas, but is it America or Americas?
Americas.
Plural,
but the form of it, just reading the description of how it's structured is fascinating.
That is the book I was referring to when I said Jennifer Egan wrote Visit from the Goon Squad, and she got praised for the form.
Yeah.
That was the book I was referring to that Bolaño had already done it.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, I want to reiterate, she was not copying him. It's just American.
And it's not her claiming she's doing it either. It's other people giving her awards.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like, you often hear, every once in a while, the next big book will come along and it'll be, this is a change. It like, the one that I heard most recently is Rachel Cusk, and everybody is very, very excited about her. And I read it and I was like, it doesn't work for me. I don't even want to sound like I'm being dismissive of her. I think she's talented, but like, I thought I was going to be reading like an actual revolution in the structure of and how novels are put together. And I read it and I was just like, I don't even care what's on the next page. So I don't really.
The critics will do that, man.
Right.
It's all that shit. We just have to clear it out. We have to go full Jonathan Bowden on it. Just totally clear them out. All the critics.
Yeah.
All the literary journals.
Doesn't matter.
Clear them out, and we're going to bring a new thing in. It's going to be us. It's going to be the podcast. It's going to be the Passage Press. It's going to be Zero's blog and
the new mob.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we're in town now. So listen, I think Kevin, you read By Night in Chile, right? And you have not, Brad?
I have not read By Night in Chile.
Yeah, you got to read that. You got to read that next, and then Distant Star. A friend of mine who's read every book by Bolaño. It swears that By Night in Chile is the best, and my personal favorite passage in all literature is in that book, and I'll go get it right now.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think it's his best book.
Okay, but it's your favorite passage.
But
so this
the passage is
right.
It's the best, not the best album, but the best song. I don't know that he would be able to find the passage from Savage Detectives, but that's okay.
Right. Yeah.
Let's see. What do you have? Oh, you did. Oh, great. Okay. Well, here we go. We get to have a reading.
Just for you guys and the listeners, remember, this is kind of more in keeping with what we were talking about 5 minutes ago.
Right.
Of course, there's names I can't pronounce.
Yeah.
Iñaki Echevarne, Bar Giardinetto, Calle Grandana del Penedès, Barcelona, July 1994. For a while, criticism travels side by side with the work. Then criticism vanishes, and it's the readers who keep pace. The journey may be long or short. Then the readers die one by one, and the work, capital W, work, continues on alone. although a new criticism and new readers gradually fall into step with it along its path. Then criticism dies again, and the readers die again, and the work passes over a trail of bones on its journey towards solitude. To come near the work, to sail in her wake, is a sign of certain death. But new criticism and new readers approach her tirelessly and relentlessly and are devoured by time and speed. Finally, the work journeys irredeemably along the great vastness. And one day, the work dies, as all things must die and come to an end. The sun and the earth and the solar system and the galaxy and the farthest reaches of man's memory. Everything that begins as comedy ends as tragedy. Now, to read this passage, it just like brought me back to reading this book. It's on page 513, and the book has maybe 650 pages. To read that passage at that point in the book was just devastating and crushing, because the book is very morose and dark and depressing. And to get to that point and to just have it, the onslaught of the depression, I just remember reading that and just like the weight of this book like crushed me. I'd have to think about this. I don't think I've ever cried from a book, but I came close with this book. Just the weight of the book is like nothing I've ever read, even more than 2666, this book for me. But that passage though is one of my favorites of all literature.
Yeah.
Astral, what is it about the Savage Detectives that makes you feel that way?
A few things. I think the book is ultimately, I think Bolaño's entire project is ultimately about the loss of innocence and naivete of a young idealistic child who will never get it back. And the ultimately tragic nature of life that I think he sees in all things. And many other writers deal with this. And I think most of them who say that there's redemption are lying to themselves. Michel Houellebecq says this explicitly in his book Serotonin, that they're lying and that there is no redemption. And he has very other colorful things to say.
That book is so dark.
Yeah.
That book is dark.
So you remember what he says at the end?
Yeah.
He says that this is the project of all writers. And he gives some examples of the solutions that some writers find to like regain the innocence of youth. And he talks about how some of them, like he names In Remembrance of Lost Time. I can't believe I
Proust.
Please, I cannot believe I blanked on
Right.
that. How the whole thing culminates in like, when you're an old man, you have to find a young 20-year-old who's got a young pussy, is what he says.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that coin is like Dostoevsky and the brothers Karamazov. Alyosha gives this speech where he's saying you have to retain the naivete and the sincerity of childhood when you feel things strongly. You have to retain that. But I think Bolaño says you can't. Like it's gone. I think he says it's gone and it's over. And there are implications for civilization as a whole, right? Because especially in like the book Amulet, but By Night in Chile as well, and 2666, he talks about how like many of these movements, these social movements, and these countries that are trying to get out from underneath the oppression of the sclerotic gerontocracy, these movements are snuffed in their cradle. And he laments that. And he definitely is talking about Chile, and he's definitely talking about the socialists who were like not really able to get off the ground and go anywhere, and how they had this vision, when they had this dream and they had all these aspirations, and they were all crushed. And how the people who backed Allende, a big part of it was a student movement. And the same thing in Mexico, which is what the book Amulet is about. It was a student movement who were trying to like change the world, and the regime came and snuffed them out in the cradle, and they never got to like realize their dreams. And for him, I think this is a metaphor, and this is what the Savage Detectives is all about. That is a metaphor for an individual, and an individual is a metaphor for the society. And in the Savage Detectives, you have the young idealistic guy who maybe was going to have somewhat of a sheltered or a limited life and limited in scope. And I think his uncle or whoever it was who funded him to go to school wanted him to be one thing, but I think a lawyer, and he wanted to be a poet. And he falls in with the visceral realists, and he has this adventure, but then the adventure's over, and he grows up to have real life. And real life is sort of a disappointment, and they all kind of wallow in obscurity. And the other guy, Mario, I think his name was, the counterpart to Arturo Bolaño, Ulysses Lima. The real life character of him, was this obscure poet in Mexico who died because he got hit by a car, one of the most ignoble deaths you can imagine. Just died in obscurity, just another number. Hardly anyone to lament his death. Some of his poems were written on napkins, partially because this wasn't like Picasso going into a cafe and paying for his food because he was Picasso. This was a guy who was fucking homeless in Mexico City, who could only write on a napkin because he was too poor to do anything else. And this is who Bolaño is memorializing in this book. And the dreams that these guys had as young writers to go on and be whatever it is, famous or fulfilling in some way, established writers in some way, never comes to pass. Now, we can talk about the politics of the Chilean Revolution and the Mexican Revolution and the Mexican student movement in the 70s. But to be honest with you, I really think that that's a petty way to interpret literature. And I think that's really the left's job to use politics. And for me, if somebody is going to say, well, Pinochet was right and Allende was going to doom Chile anyway, which I believe, by the way. I think Chile would have been doomed under Allende.
I don't know nearly enough about the situation to say, but I'll take your word for it.
To overlook the heart and the feeling and the just the guts that Bolaño spills and the tears that he spills over these people, it speaks to something universal, regardless of whether or not you agree with the politics.
Yeah, I think a good work of literature is always going to transcend whatever topical politics it's on the surface it's about, But.
So hopefully I made a good case for the Savage Detectives.
No, you absolutely
Listen,
did.
You made a great case.
Sure.
Please read the Savage Detectives if you haven't. And what it's making me think of is as I age into my podcast dotage, it makes me think of that scene or those scenes you were on when you were a young person and you were too naive to even know that you were on a scene. You were.
Oh, yes. That's why I love this book, bro. It brought me back to that moment that I hadn't thought about, that I kind of shit on as an adult.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That one bar, that one club where everybody would be, that one house where everybody would be.
Right.
And those moments are they're like fireworks in the sky. And you can't imagine it ever ending when you're in it, when you're young. Yeah. And that book captures that as well as anything.
And that's all bittersweet, right? Because it's you can't do that for your whole life, but also would you rather go back and have not done it?
Well, of course, and then of course also here you have an older man writing with a little more wisdom from the relatively cozy perch of Spain. I think the Med Coast. Looking back on those kind of rough and wild days in Mexico, and there was some bitterness, which we touched on the core episode for this, from the people that he wrote about. But I think that's natural. That's bound to happen. Yeah.
Well, I mean, bitterness over this book, which I've read about, but also a lot of people. The way I was saying about my friends who felt a personal connection to this and personal investment in his legacy. These guys never met the guy. You know what I mean? These guys read his books when I read them, which was 10 years after they had made a splash on the scene. There were people who knew him in real life and who worked with him and who read his rough drafts and who were his editors and who was his publishers and really bound up and tied into his life. And his success was contingent upon them and vice versa. They really took issue with a lot of things that happened with his legacy, and a lot of it seems petty to me, but I can understand too. Like, imagine if your friend died, or your colleague, or your what's the word?
My podcast co-host.
One of us.
Yeah,
No.
and you meticulously took care of their legacy, and it was all going perfectly well according to plan, and then it blows up, and a whole bunch of other hands get put in the pot, and a whole bunch of other people get involved who are only like 6 degrees of separation related to the guy, never met him, don't understand his work on the level that you understand it, and want to change his legacy to market it.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't let it affect me. There's no reason why it should affect any of us.
It doesn't change the books
at all.
Yeah, right.
But I can see why it was battled over, especially his wife. I guess, and I think you guys said this in your show. Your guys' episode, by the way, is really impressive. It's the only place I've seen. I mean, first of all, you spent 3 hours on it, which is dedication in and of itself right there. But you covered the impression that people had of him. You covered the works themselves with your own interpretation of it, as well as just like a synopsis, like a straightforward synopsis, and some biographical details of him. You got all of that in there, which is like very difficult to do.
That's how we roll, maybe.
Yeah, it's good.
That's what we do.
Heartofdarkpod.com, patreon.com/heartofdarkpod for the After Dark episode that's coming. It's coming soon. We're going to talk about, was Roberto Bolaño a junkie? Yeah.
I want to stick with Bolaño, but you guys are going to come on my podcast, and I really want you guys to spend a lot of time exploring and explaining the theme of the art of darkness, because for me, and we're going to leave it here because this could take over the rest of the talk. But this is me reverting to my hosting.
Yeah, for sure. I get it.
You get it. Yeah,
it happens when I go on other shows too.
Yeah.
I start asking them questions, and I'm like, oh, hold on. Yeah. I get it.
For me, like every 2 or 3 years, you know the cat meme where the cat is holding the paper and the person tweets, I'm going to buy a boat or something. Every 2 or 3 years, I'll read, a grip of books, and I'll like put that chapter away and start the next phase. Right. And I'll be the cat meme, and I'll be like, wow, every book I read is like suicidally depressing. Like, why is that?
Right.
And that's like what your show is about.
Yeah.
And you guys have an episode about, it's either coming out or it's already out, about Burroughs. Is it out yet?
We have our first episode is about Burroughs. We're going to do another episode about Burroughs because, believe it or not, we had no idea what we were doing in the first episode. So
no, tell me about it, man.
Yeah.
I feel like I just started figuring out like how to have a podcast, even though I'm like 12 episodes in.
Yeah.
Bolaño was a big fan of his, and he mentions him in The Savage Detectives. There's some references that any reader of Naked Lunch would catch in 2666. So Bolaño knows what he's doing, and he knows he's establishing. I mean, he's conscientious of the tradition that he's writing, but he's also he's leaving breadcrumbs for you, and it would be really hard to miss them. And for me, I read him when I was like late 30s. I think I might have been like 36 or 37 when I first read him, 35, somewhere in there. So I had a lifetime of reading behind me, but I have to imagine that for like a young guy who this is like one of his first forays into like serious literature, to follow the Bolaño breadcrumb trail you could spend a whole entire lifetime doing it. I mean, I picked up a bunch of new authors, new to me, because he said something about them, or I still plan to read others at some point that I haven't gotten to yet. But as a young guy who hasn't read some of the people he talks about, like Kerouac and Burroughs and others, the Beats, I mean, did you guys think that like the visceral realism and I forgot what they were, the real life? What was the real life counterpart?
Infrarealist.
Yeah. Did you see that kind of as them trying to be like the next Beats?
That's how I took it when I read it. Yeah.
And they are sort of proto-punk. So between the Beats and the punks, something like that.
I think I sat there. Yeah,
a little bit Dada kind of.
Part of that I think was I had a big beat phase.
Oh, so did I.
So
I mean,
yeah, I knew all that. I knew all that beat literature and their lives and all that crap, right? So
I mean, are you a white literary man in America if you haven't
yes.
passed through that phase? But
yeah,
I guess I'm
well,
not.
all you were
some
going.
people hate them. Some people hate them.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't. I'm not as enthralled with Kerouac as I was.
Yeah, same.
I'm actually more enthralled with Burroughs than I was, to be honest. I think
He's the better writer.
Yeah, he is. Every time I read something, go back to something of his, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot this guy was a total genius.
I think I just read everything that Hunter ever wrote. Not related, but that was my version of the Beats. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I see the Beats, Hunter, and Bukowski all kind of in the same sphere, even though they're not, obviously not. And Bukowski even says like,
but if you were to take like a zoomed out art historical perspective, you would put them all together.
Totally. Exactly.
Mid-century American
masculine renaissance or something. Yeah.
And really,
and also kind of Western, even though the Beats were out East, there's like anyway.
Well, we've been talking about this genealogy, like who picked it up. The only person that comes to mind in the 80s who was of the 80s that I can think of is William T. Vollman. I don't know if you guys have read him.
A little bit.
He's really well known for these like doorstopper tomes that are like 1,000 pages long. But in the 80s, he wrote these little like paperback
You've written Shining Angels or whatever. Yeah.
Horrors for Gloria and the Butterfly Stories, I think it was called.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And that's the only thing I've read by him.
Oh, okay.
And he was totally trying. Oh, Dennis Johnson too is another one.
The great Dennis Johnson. Yeah.
But after them, though, man, I think it was over. Like Bret Easton Ellis is. I get what he's doing, but I don't know. He wasn't.
He's writing him. I think he's brilliant. This is not knocking him at all, but and we might have mentioned this on the episode we did, Bret Easton Ellis.
Be careful. I want to get him on the podcast.
Right. He's a brilliant writer. But he was intentionally writing about surfaces. It's intentionally superficial.
That's the problem though. That's what happened. It became meta. And the writers became aware of themselves and they became aware of the tradition and they became aware of like this thing that people did.
Yeah.
And they did it spontaneously with Kerouac and them and Henry Miller.
Right. And for all the problems you might have with Kerouac was literally like crying beside a road somewhere in in New Mexico or something. And it's like, again, you might not like the actual poetry, but like he was trying to get into the heart of things. Yeah.
Well, a controversial statement, maybe. For me, I'll take something that's bad over something that's highly polished if the thing that's bad has heart and the thing that's highly polished is like very mechanical and let's be real here for a second. Some of Bolaño is bad.
It just is. Yeah, he's not the greatest poet of all time. He didn't become known for his poetry.
No,
and 2666 for all its greatness, you could have tightened it up a little bit.
Big time.
I don't know that he had time, Brett. He had no time.
I know he didn't. I'm just saying. Yeah. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I hope to reach a 10th of it at some point in my life, but
not all of it though. Right. Only parts, right? I mean, that's what you're saying, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think,
he was also an answer to a kind of twee quality that had become ascendant in Latin American letters with the magical realism, and
at least we're going to write about Latin American stuff that had made it to America,
right.
US.
And that was another element that the people sort of resented and worried about, this idea that, so why did the gringos like this so much? What is this saying about what they think about who we are? There's always that tension, right, between Latin America and then the great Satan to the north. And I don't know what else to say about it, but that was there in the air for sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, and it was just a case of like, this always happens. Oh, we knew Roberto when he was a smelly poet in Mexico. And what do you mean what do you mean? He's dead and now these novels are the bestseller in America? Like it doesn't compute. If you knew him, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's got to feel very strange. Yeah. Yeah. Well, why don't we, if you guys don't mind, maybe we read that passage from I'm blanking on what the other passage was.
Yeah.
But you said it was
the
your
one
favorite.
from By Night in Chile?
Yes, please. And then maybe we'll kind of wind down if that's cool with people.
Yeah,
Yep,
we're gonna do the.
We are going to come
do
back. We're
more
going to take a
time.
break.
We'll do
and come back and do
another
a dark
20,
one.
30 minutes on the After Dark episode for
Cool.
Patreon subscribers at patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. Please genuinely support the show if you like what you're doing, if you've listened all the way through here. Just, I think the donations start at like $3 a month.
Yeah.
If you can't get $3 a month out of the couch, then I don't know what you're doing. Go write a poem on a napkin once a month and
laminate it. Put it up in your shower.
Or go down to the bodega or the 7-Eleven if you're in flyover. Go down to the Holiday Station if you're in New York City. Go to the bodega and say, I want to subscribe to Art of Darkness podcast. You're going to want to really be loud when you're saying it. Make sure you haven't showered for a while and say, give me a napkin.
Yeah,
and I'm going to write you a poem. And then you're going to give me $3 and I'm going to support the show.
Okay. I like it. I like that. That's a good, that seems like a good business model, Kevin.
I'm behind that.
Are you finding it, Astral?
Well, you know what's interesting?
I love the cover of this thing. I'm seeing the cover of the book.
It's my favorite cover of all time.
It's quite good. Yeah.
You know what, guys? I just stumbled upon something that I didn't catch the first time.
Wow.
So he's constantly throwing out the names of authors that you never heard of, and he makes up fictitious authors.
Yes.
So for a long time, and the Distant Star, he does that constantly. I didn't know who was real and who was he made up. Turns out a lot of them are real. And I'm going through this, and he's talking about Ernst Jünger, and he's talking about all these books he wrote, Storm of Steel, obviously, on the Marvel Cliffs. And he's I don't even remember this passage, and I didn't know who Jünger was when I read this book, so I have to go back now. Looks like I've highlighted a bunch of passages with Jünger.
We're going to do Jünger later this year.
Yeah, we do have an episode on Jünger coming up.
What else do we have coming up? We got some good stuff, Brad. I think we're doing Artaud.
We are doing Artaud with the great Adam Lairs coming on. I am so deep in Hieronymus Bosch research right now that I don't know if I'm ever coming up.
Did you see that tweet Amanda Milius just shared?
I did not know.
Oh, she was criticizing there's some new it's a museum or university, I forgot who it is, but they're doing a series on in-depth analyses on art, like an hour-long episode each about a different artist, and she shared one about Hieronymus Bosch.
Oh, really?
That they were criticizing him, saying it was Christian propaganda, and they were saying that it's not licentious and pornographic; it's actually, puritanical.
That is actually the prevailing academic interpretation right now.
Yeah, I imagine there's truth to it too.
She
didn't like the interpretation, but I think there's some truth to it.
It sounds like there might be some commies at that institution.
Impossible. we read all them out.
Are you telling me that there is a leftist interpretation coming out of a current day Western institution? But that is great, Brad. I'm glad you've taken the Bosch pill. That is exciting.
It's literally. Yeah, it's going to be great because we haven't done anybody nearly that old. There's no biographical data about him. It's going to be great. I promise. And then PK Dick with the great Aldous Asterion is coming on. Yeah.
Phil K. Dick is a huge spiritual and intellectual influence on my show and me.
Yeah. And, he's a big deal.
You know what I think?
He really is.
You know what I think? I feel like this is provable by recourse to something written somewhere that I haven't read yet. But I think the structure of Naked Lunch, I think he structured that book after a Hieronymus Bosch painting. I think that book is a Hieronymus Bosch triptych. And I think the part of about the crimes is like Bolaño trying to recreate the literary recreation of the Bosch triptych. That's what I think.
I love that,
and I think it's real.
I love that.
Look, I mean, when I was coming up as a playwright, one of my favorite things is to wander around the Tate Modern in London, listening to the Downward Spiral on my headphones.
And that's a vibe,
right? And then just learning that you could take literary structure this ineffable, strange metaphor that structure is from any other work of art, a symphony. And you go, ooh, I could write a play like that, or I could write a novel like that. A statue, you could pull ideas and then apply them to different media. It's so rewarding when you're young and you realize that.
I love that you said that. And I don't think people talk about that enough. And it needs to be evoked more. And when I said I locked myself in my apartment writing that novel, listening to depressing music, The Downward Spiral was one of the main albums.
It's a good album. Yeah. And of course, the great Johnny Cash cover at the end.
Oh, I don't think that was on. Oh, right.
That's a joke.
All right, I found
the inside joke.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I get it. This passage is sort of apropos of nothing at this point.
That's fine. I love it.
Time to find it.
That's all right.
You know the critic James Wood?
That name rings
I know the name.
Couldn't tell you anything about
he
him.
wrote a book.
Right.
Go ahead.
No. It's it.
He wrote a book that I read, but the name is but it's got a very simple name, like what the novel is or how the novel works or something like that. And he was a critic for like the New Republic and the New York Times. And he pointed this passage out in his review of this book. And he says it's like one of the best passages he's ever read. He reproduces the thing. This is in a New York Times book review, a short article. He reproduces this passage in whole because it's that good. So I'm going to take a little sip here.
Mm-hmm. Looking him up, James Wood. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, he's okay. He's good. And he's worth reading.
How Fiction Works, I think, is probably
How Fiction Works, right. So let's see here. It's kind of long. I got to find where it starts, actually. Okay, so Kevin, you've read this, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you remember he's talking about falcons here.
Aha.
So Teguele, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Teguele is a falcon. So Father Fabrice, Teguele in full flight, scattering not just flocks of pigeons, but also flocks of starlings, which were in those long gone happy days, were common in the countryside of Provence, where Sordello, wandered once, and Teguele flew off and disappeared among the low clouds, the clouds descending from the desecrated yet somehow still pure hills of Avignon. And while Father Fabrice and I conversed, Teguele appeared again like a lightning bolt on the abstract idea of a lightning bolt, and swooped on the huge flocks of starlings coming out of the west like swarms of flies, darkening the sky with their erratic fluttering. And after a few minutes, the fluttering of the starlings was scattered and bloodied. An afternoon on the outskirts of Avignon took on a deep red hue, like the color of sunset seen from an airplane, or the color of dawns when the passenger is woken gently by the engine whistling in his ears and lifts up the little blind and sees the horizon marked with a red line, like the planet's femoral artery or the planet's aorta gradually swelling. And I saw that swelling blood vessel in the sky over Avignon, the blood-stained flight of the starlings. Teguele splashed color like an abstract expressionless painter. Ah, the peace, the harmony of nature, nowhere as evident as the unequivocal as in Avignon. And then Father Fabrici whistled, and we waited for an indefinable time, measured only by the beating of our hearts, until our quivering warrior came to rest upon his arm. That seemed actually a little melodramatic.
I liked it.
No.
But yeah.
No, it's evocative. That is not about a hawk.
Right.
No. Starlings.
Right.
It's about a lot of other things, man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't think we're going to top that. We're going to try on the After Dark episode. Astral, thank you so much for coming on. People can find you at AFScast on the Bird website. Do you want to pitch your Substack as well?
Yeah, the Substack. One thing I don't like about the format of the Substack is to get to everything there, you have to scroll, and then you have to click see more. So I'm trying to figure that out. But for right now, the Substack has about 12 episodes of my podcast and maybe 10 long-form essays I wrote and one piece of fiction so far. And it's astralflight.substack.com. You can link it in my bio. My pinned tweet always has a link. And my podcast is primarily about literature and film and art in the world today, in the digital world today. You
Yeah.
guys will be the perfect guests for that when you come on.
Let's do it. We'll talk.
Love it.
We'll talk offline about that for sure.
All right. Well, let's take 5. Let's go. Maybe read a little Bukowski. Try to get ourselves.
I'm gonna refill my vodka.
There
here.
you go.
There you go. And I'm gonna turn off the Zoom. We're gonna come back. We're gonna do the After Dark. Artofdarkpod.com, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Support the show. You want to hear more? That would be great. And then in those 5 minutes, I'm just gonna go sit and think about all of the hyper intense moments that I had when I was on these scenes in my 20s, living life at a valence, at a level of energy that I will never experience again. And I might shed a little tear about it.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, thanks again for coming on, Astral. Really appreciate it.
The pleasure was all mine. I'm
all right,
honored.
man. Oh, no, it's great. And I hope you can come back another time.
I'd love to.
Awesome. All right. See you boys in a bit.